Hey everybody, and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to talk about what exactly blockchain is. Let's get started. So, if you have been following this channel for a while, you probably already know that I don't like to start out a video with a technical definition of something. So, let me ask you a question. Have you ever heard of blockchain? If so, what do you think it is? Maybe you know that it is somehow connected with cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin or Ethereum. Well, that is true. Blockchain was first used by the Bitcoin community to track transactions of this digital currency. But what exactly is it? In simple terms, blockchain is basically a way of storing data. This data can be anything. For example, it could be your blood type, or maybe the number of likes on a Facebook post. However, unlike a normal database, blockchain has some very interesting properties which make it special. These properties are achieved by the way it stores the data. In other words, by the way it creates its database. For example, blockchain tries to solve the problem of trust. Trust is an important thing when dealing with other people. You need to trust them in order to form relationships, work with them, or make deals. The issue is that you cannot always trust others, and sometimes there is no way to really ensure that someone will keep their promises. Blockchain solves this problem by not having to rely on anyone else but the network. For example, if Alice wants to send some money to Bob, she doesn't need to trust Bob, but instead she trusts the network. And because the network is basically everyone, the chances that everyone will cheat on her are pretty low. Now, let's see how this works in a bit more detail. Imagine that Alice wants to send $10 to Bob. When Alice sends this transaction to Bob, it gets broadcast to the whole network. Now, all the computers in the network, also called nodes, verify the transaction. In order to verify the transaction, they basically check whether Alice has enough funds to cover the transaction costs. If this is the case, they agree on the transaction. In other words, they reach a consensus. In technical terms, reaching a consensus means agreeing on the same state of the system. If the transaction is valid, they add it to a block. A block, as the name suggests, is a block of data. It contains information about several transactions as well as information about the previous block. This is where the chain in blockchain comes into play. Each block is linked to the previous one, and together they form a chain. Once a block is added to the blockchain, it cannot be removed anymore. That's why blockchain is immutable. This property has many advantages, but we will talk about them later in the video. Blockchain can be public or private, depending on who can read and write to it. In a public blockchain, everyone can participate in the network. That's why the data in a public blockchain is transparent. Anyone can look at it. In a private blockchain, only certain people are allowed to access the data. A consortium blockchain is basically a combination of public and private blockchains. Only a limited number of participants can read and write to the data, but these participants can invite others to read the data. An example of a consortium blockchain is the R3 Corridor. Corridor is a distributed ledger platform based on blockchain technology and is used to track financial transactions between enterprises. Now that you know what a block is, let's see how new blocks are added to the blockchain. Adding a new block to the blockchain is called mining. The miners, which are the ones adding the blocks, have to solve a very difficult math equation. The difficulty of the equation is set in a way that only a little change in the block will result in a correct solution. If the block has a little change in it, it will quickly become clear that the block is incorrect. Basically, the block has to fulfill some conditions to be accepted by the network. Again, this process of reaching a consensus is very important. Once the miner has found a valid block, it gets broadcast to the other nodes in the network. They verify the block, and if everything is correct, they add the block to their copy of the blockchain. Miners are usually rewarded with cryptocurrency for adding new blocks to the blockchain. This incentive is important because otherwise no one would spend their computational power and electricity to do the mining. You might have also seen websites ending with a /explorer. An explorer is basically a tool that allows you to look at a blockchain. It shows you the blocks in the blockchain and the transactions in each block. Each block has a unique ID called a hash. The hash is basically a long and complicated string of characters which represents the block. Using a blockchain explorer, you can look up a hash and find out what data the block contains. For example, here I'm looking at a block on the Bitcoin blockchain. The block contains several transactions. If I click on one of the transactions, I can see the inputs and outputs of the transaction. Blockchain is a very new technology, but it already has many applications. We will discuss some of them in just a moment. First, let's look at the benefits of using blockchain. There are three main properties of blockchain which make it useful: immutability, transparency, and decentralization. Immutability basically means that once data is stored on the blockchain, it cannot be removed. This makes it very reliable. Transparency means that everyone can view the data. This allows for a high degree of trust in the system. Decentralization means that the data is stored on multiple computers. This makes it very difficult for someone to manipulate the data. Another advantage of blockchain is that it is very efficient. Because blockchain stores data in blocks, it can store a lot of data very efficiently. This also makes it very fast. In addition, blockchain is highly scalable. It can handle a very large number of users and transactions. This makes it ideal for use in large organizations. All right, now let's talk about some use cases for blockchain. As mentioned before, blockchain was created by the Bitcoin community to keep track of transactions of this digital currency. Since then, blockchain has been used to track many other types of transactions. For example, voting, supply chain management, healthcare data, and even academic credentials. Imagine you buy some bread at the supermarket. With blockchain, you can trace the entire journey of the bread from the bakery to your plate. You can see where it was made, how it was transported, and even who baked it. This transparency can help to improve food safety and quality. Blockchain can also help to fight against counterfeiting. For example, luxury goods are often counterfeited. With blockchain, you can easily track the origin of the goods. This makes it very easy to identify counterfeit products. One of the most popular applications of blockchain is in the field of voting. With blockchain, you can vote anonymously and securely. This can help to prevent voter fraud and increase voter turnout. Another interesting application of blockchain is in the field of healthcare. With blockchain, you can store patients' medical records in a secure and transparent way. This can help to improve the quality of care and reduce the cost of healthcare. Now that you know what blockchain is and some of its potential applications, you may be wondering what the limitations are. One of the biggest challenges facing blockchain is scalability. As the number of users and transactions grows, the blockchain becomes slower and more expensive to use. Another challenge is the energy consumption of mining. Mining is the process of adding new blocks to the blockchain. This requires a lot of computing power, which in turn consumes a lot of energy. This is not sustainable in the long run. Finally, blockchain is still a relatively new technology. This means that there is a lack of skilled workers. In addition, there is no international standard for blockchain yet. This makes it difficult for different blockchains to communicate with each other. All right, that's been a quick introduction to blockchain. If you want to learn more about blockchain, subscribe to this channel. I will try to make more videos about it in the future. Thank you for watching and see you next time.